We're trying to listen and learn from each other as we have gone through the process of defining the science of the policy issues that we're working on, both the science of the problem and the solution, as well as what I would call scientific measures of performance. Next semester, we're going to be in the midst of the management part of the workshop. So we'll take this same bill, and now we're going to try to put the program in effect, which will be a different set of exercises and a different set of thoughts. But the things that will stay the same is the group work, the project management, the communication, and the fact that we're going to have an output due every week. And so the workload will be very similar, but the nature of the work will be very different. So I always enjoy the summer workshop a lot because I'm not a scientist. I just play one on TV. So I enjoy listening and learning about the science of your projects. In a sense, I'm the target. Maybe me and Howard and Louise are the targets of this analysis. I mean, you've got, with Matt and with Bob, those guys are the real physical scientists in the crowd. We're the non-scientists. So I have to be able to understand what you're talking about for this to work. And it almost always does work, and it's always very exciting to me because I learn something that I don't know about. So we're going to start today by learning about bees, right? We're starting with the bees. Professor Rosen's group is the briefer for the bees here. Come on forward.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Laura Thornton, and I'm excited to be here today and sharing with you my team's work this summer on the Saving America's Pollinators Act of 2019, otherwise known as HR 1337. I'd first like to thank my group for their hard work all summer and our advisor, Professor Rosen, for her continued support. So just a quick agenda for today. We're going to be doing a short introduction before diving into the problem at hand. We'll be looking at the solutions proposed by the bill, in addition to how we would measure the success of the bill's components and some controversies surrounding the issue as a whole. So the quickest way to bring everybody up to speed on this issue is a quote directly from the text of the bill from the Department of Agriculture, stating that the current losses of honeybee colonies are too high to confidently ensure that the United States will be able to meet the pollination demands for agricultural crops. The products that you see on the sides of the slide here are all products that completely depend on the process of pollination. Pollinators as a whole provide $24 billion per year to the US economy. So we need to put in a significant effort into protecting their populations. Although we think of bees as our primary pollinator, many other species conduct the process of pollination also, as seen on this slide. For the analysis of this bill, we are focusing on commercial bees. These commercial bees are monitored by beekeepers and kept in contained colonies. We deploy them strategically to supplement our pollination needs in commercial agriculture. So you can think of them as our partners in agriculture in this sense. As you can see, they experienced their highest rates of loss in 2018 of 60 to 80 million bees. Staggering statistics, as many of the other species here have experienced as well. So before we get into the specifics of the bill, we're going to be discussing the scope of the problem at hand. Neonicotinoids are a class of pesticide made in part with nicotine to fight off sucking insects, such as aphids. When bees ingest neonicotinoids, some sublethal effects they can experience are disorientation, threatening the success of their offspring, weakened immune systems, impeding colony growth, and finally, these colonies can end up collapsing. This is known as colony collapse disorder as defined by the National Resources Defense Council. This graph here, created by Bee Informed, a leading nonprofit for monitoring pollinator population, shows the increase in the use of 3 popular neonicotinoids while honey production decreases, illustrating a linkage and an inverse relationship between the two. When thinking about the toxicity of these neonicotinoids, a lethal dose per bee is 4 to 5 nanograms. So if we're looking at the left side of the graph, the lowest rung on the axis of neonicotinoids in pounds is 0.5 million. This has the potential to kill 4 quadrillion bees. Neonicotinoids are typically applied to the seeds themselves, meaning that those seeds will grow up to crops with the pesticide in their system. The nectar, the stems, the guttation water, which is the water that is exuded from the plant's pores, and the pollen will all have neonicotinoids in them. According to the National Institute of Health, the half-life for pollen, meaning the time it takes for half of the concentration of the pesticide to degrade, is 1,000 days. So when bees interact with these crops, if they're not already experiencing the sublethal or lethal effects from this water and pollen on the plant, they're transporting it back to their hive or their colony and making contaminated honey with it, thus contaminating the entire hive. The difficulty with this issue is that neonicotinoids are applied to crops to kill insects that bring harm to plants, known as target pests, seen on the left of this graphic. However, they inadvertently kill other insects, known as non-target species, up at the top. And in this case, we are particularly concerned about bees. We have an increasing dependency on neonicotinoid use in the United States, with 150 million acres of farmland in the US. And colony loss can be clearly linked to neonicotinoid use, indicated by these maps. The darker regions of each map indicate high levels of colony loss and high levels of pesticide use, respectively. Farmers are depending on this neonicotinoid because it is cheap and it is effective. And at the end of the day, their ability to put food on the table for their families directly correlates with their crop yield. On the flip side, some commercial beekeepers have been reporting up to 100% losses every year. So they are also experiencing economic challenges as well when it comes to pollinator populations. Some additional threats that bees face, which may account for some of the parts of these maps that don't match up quite as easily, are losing habitat due to unexpected seasonal variations and reducing the typical availability of nutrient sources, potentially due to climate change effects. The varroa mite is also a significant threat facing bee colonies, which is an ectoparasite that can invade the colonies and easily transmit viruses to them. If these bees are already coming into contact with neonicotinoids, they're already disoriented and have a hard enough time finding food, especially when it's already fragmented due to seasonal variations, and their immune systems are already weakened, making the varroa mite's job even easier of transmitting diseases to them. Now we'll be looking at the components of the bill and how it aims to address these issues at hand. So this is called the Saving America's Pollinators Act, but it targets honeybees specifically. They are our most valuable pollinator to us, and they are also an umbrella species. If we can reduce the impacts to bees, it will hopefully positively cascade into other pollinator populations. The three aspects of the bill starts with the Pollinator Protection Board. This will be a board comprised of farmers, scientists, beekeepers, and representatives of conservation organizations. This is a unique component of the bill in that it addresses the fact that there are diverse stakeholders and competing priorities surrounding this issue. So hopefully it will provide a forum for all of these parties to come together and discuss a solution. The bill will also cancel current neonicotinoid registrations and stop new ones from coming to market. This is our attempt of trying to hit the pause button on this issue and give us time to figure out how to best address all aspects of pollinator decline, which leads me into the third bullet point of monitoring pollinator populations. This research will be spearheaded by the board and will help inform their decisions and their recommendations to the Department of Agriculture and the Department of the Interior. In other parts of the world, such as Europe and Canada, they have been facing the same issue and have come up with solutions very similar to the ones proposed in this bill. The European Food Safety Authority and Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency conducted their own studies that confirmed the linkage between neonicotinoid use and bee death. In Canada's case, they implemented management strategies in 2014, and in the 3 years that followed, they experienced 80% declines in the number of bee incidences. This existing research enforces the strength of the suggested ban in the bill that we are studying. So you've heard some of the aspects of the complexities of this issue, but how could these complications affect the bill's success as a whole? So again, talking about different stakeholders that are going to be present on the Pollinator Protection Board, we're talking about farmers that use this pesticide because it is cheap and effective. It is also non-toxic to humans, so if farmers are interacting with this every day, they're also not going to experience any adverse health effects. Beekeepers have to put their colonies through enough stress by moving them from cropland to cropland and farm to farm, and these bees can experience a sort of secondhand smoke effect in the neonicotinoids leaching into the surrounding environment through soil or water. There are also 15 major crops which use neonicotinoids as a pest prevention method and also simultaneously depend on pollination specifically. So we're sending these bees into the environment to perform this ecosystem service that only them and a few other organisms can perform, but we're sending them into a toxic environment. Pesticide manufacturers continue to advocate that neonicotinoids can cause absolutely no harm to bees as long as they are applied effectively. And even though we have science to refute this, pesticide manufacturers have built up a lot of trust among the farming community because of the effectiveness of their products. Conservationists and scientists may ask if this bill goes far enough. We're talking about America's food supply that is at stake, in addition to populations of many different organisms. So we don't want to have to address this issue again because we got it wrong the first time. So we need to make sure that this bill's measures meet every demand of the issue. So some challenges when measuring the success of this bill. We talked about the long half-life of the chemicals being 1,000 days in pollen. This means that it could be many years before we experience any positive effects of this bill. And if constituents think that we are going to see leaps and bounds of change right away, this might discredit this ban's effectiveness. Our realistic goal here is to reach acceptable levels of colony loss of about 10 to 20%, when we're not looking for a huge spike in pollinator populations here, even though we would love it and we would take that for sure. We're really just looking to match the lightest bar on this graph here indicated as acceptable winter losses. Monitoring pollinator populations proves difficult in and of itself. Commercial bees are a lot easier to study. They're already managed by beekeepers and they're contained for the most part, whereas wild bees are a lot more dispersed and a lot more diverse. So that proves challenging as in and of itself. The additional threats that we already discussed of seasonal variation, habitat degradation, and the varroa mite are also additional threats that bees face that could affect this ban's and this bill's measures in the amount that this ban will change the tide of pollinator degradation. So overall, we've known that neonicotinoids have a significantly negative impact on pollinator health. It's been indicated in the science that we've noted here and in other regions of the world as well. However, pesticides are an area of this issue that we can directly control. We can take the pesticides out of the equation, and then we can more adequately address the whole entire problem at hand. So the actions of this bill are definitely a step in the right direction that we must take. Thank you.
Hi. If the farmers are also dependent on bees to pollinate their crops, why have they not adopted other alternatives to the neonicotinoids?
Sure. So neonicotinoids, in addition to being cheap and effective and non-toxic to humans, they also are unique in the way that the pests do not build up any resistance to them. So it makes a really good case when we're talking about cost-benefit analysis to keep using these because they're effective every single year and they don't have to change their pesticide use at all. An alternative to this would be integrated pest management, which is a more natural and scientific-based way of doing things, deploying natural predators in order to defeat these insects as well. And even though neonicotinoids cost about, for the average farm size, they cost about $10,000 to deploy every year, integrated pest management can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 a year. So you might say, like, oh, it's cheaper, why don't they do it? But it is a very labor-intensive and a very time-intensive strategy, and it's not a guaranteed fix to the problem. So again, if they're depending on crop yields to put food on their table, then they're most likely going to pick the more reliable option.
Thank you, Laura. Monitoring wild pollinator populations would be a big and expensive job. Does the bill get into the wheres and hows of how that program might work?
So the specifics of that portion of the bill states that the Secretary of the Interior will work with the EPA to undergo annual monitoring of pollinator populations and produce public reports and make it public data for citizens, but it does not actually go into the funding breakdown of it. So that just adds to the challenges of this bill and how it might be difficult to be able to measure how successfully this bill is enacted.
We'll take one more. Do we have a third question? Okay, then let's thank you for listening.